Chaudhry, and today I'm delighted to be talking with Siri Hustvedt about her new novel, her latest novel, Memories of the Future. Siri, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
I know it's screen to screen instead of face to face, but that's what we have to work with. You know, on the face of it, the title of your novel is completely paradoxical when it says Memories of the Future.
Yes.
But in the context of the book, it makes perfect sense. So do you want to talk about how memory and imagination work in your novel?
Yes. I have long thought, and it's not an original thought, that memory and imagination are, if not the identical faculty in human beings, that they are closely related, linked faculties. So simply, it's impossible for any human being to imagine if he or she has no memory of the past. The way we create an imaginary future, which is itself a fiction, is by reconfiguring or using the memories of our own past to project into that imaginary future. So the paradoxical title is a way of talking about something that's quite, I think, mysterious, which is the imagination itself. There's another point, I think, to be made, is that our memories of the past are also shot through with the imagined. In other words, we do not remember the way documentary film remembers. Our memories change depending on our emotions. They shift over time. Sigmund Freud turns out to be right, even from on a molecular biological level, that every time we retrieve a memory, they're subject to change. So there's no original memory in the brain.
Well, and also even when someone is writing an autobiography or trying to recreate the past, it's really stories we tell ourselves. So it's through a fictional filter that we see our own lives, our own past.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I think there are a number of dominant fictions that I think we have a very hard time escaping. There's lots of debate about what narrative actually is, how we create narrative. There seems to be no culture without stories, right? So we string events together and create meaning. And we also remember in that way. Now, traumatic memories are sometimes different. So trauma can be recalled in an almost bodily, violent, visual way, for example. Sometimes there's no images at all. It's just a kind of motor sensory shock. That's a different kind of memory. Our autobiographical memories are influenced by narratives and by kind of mythical narratives in the culture that we all use to make sense of our own lives, good ones and bad ones.
True. And, I found it really moving that the daughter in the novel, the narrator, recovers these old memories in this lost journal of her youth at the time that her mother is losing the memories that she had, so it was a very poignant crossing. And also in the novel, the narrator says, memories are porous. And I found that fascinating in the way that you reflected also in the genres. They are porous. Is this a historical recreation of a time in New York? Is this memoir? Is it mystery, whether it's the mystery she's writing or what she hears through the neighbor's wall. So it's fascinating how you tell us about how you keep all these parts, and they're really moving parts in equilibrium.
Yes, the structure of the book, it was in a way an organic structure, but I can say that I had spent over a year trying to write another novel, which was also about memory and time. There was a traumatic incident, not the same one. It was a different book. And that book was dead. I don't know, it was one of those strange things that hasn't happened to me for a while, but the book simply died on me, and I kept trying to fix it. I spent a lot of time failing, but I think during that failure, I understood more and more about what the deep desire of the novel I actually wanted to write was. So by the time I launched on Memories of the Future, the structure seemed to present itself almost as an organism. After it was finished, I thought, this book, it's like an origami, right? It starts out as a flat story, and then it keeps folding in on itself and folding in on itself through these repetitions that I hope take on additional meaning. And by the end, you have this little bird origami, in flight. That was my image. So it is an unconscious structure, which doesn't mean I wasn't aware of what was happening. But the book did seem to emerge, if you will.
Well, talking about a bird in flight, it's interesting that the cover has a woman in flight and she has feathers on. So it's very much present in the way that you created it. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is you call it the portrait of the artist as a young woman. And you've written so much in your nonfiction as well as your fiction about the artist figure. And I always think how an artist is often a stand-in for the writer, like in Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, Lily Briscoe trying to finish a painting.
Yes.
And what she hears all the time is the voice of a man saying, women can't write, women can't paint. Actually, the other way around, women can't paint, women can't write. And that condescending male voice is something that is very much present for your narrator, reaching back to her childhood. So tell me how that worked in your sense of the novel.
Yes, I think in the very first paragraph of the book, the narrator says that she didn't know what she didn't know at the time as she was writing was that she was also being written. And I think that sense of understanding how cultural platitudes, cultural fictions, cultural narratives say about the great man, which recurs in the book in some comic ways and some more serious ways, are internalized by this young woman, the narrator. There's a young narrator and an old narrator, and the old narrator is looking back, if you will, on the young narrator. So the young narrator does not really understand the degree to which she has been withheld. And also, I think she doesn't understand how angry she is about it. Right. So the book is a kind of progress of coming to consciousness of anger and then transcending it, I hope.
Well, that rage is almost palpable, and it's against both this kind of, there's an act of great physical violence, but there's also intellectual aggression and brutality. And she has this this talisman against it, a switchblade that she calls the Baroness. So, I hadn't heard of Baroness Elsa before, so that was a real discovery in the book. I mean, I know Knightwood and Juna Barnes.
Yeah.
But tell me about your connection, your discovery of the Baroness.
Well, I was young, but I discovered her through Juna Barnes. I love Juna Barnes. I still love Knightwood. I think it's a great book. And I think I've read it 4 times. So I knew about the Baroness. I knew that the figure in Knightwood was based on a real person. I knew that, Ezra Pound had put her in the cantos. I had little tidbits about the Baroness. I did not, at that time, although indeed her poems were in the collection at the University of Maryland, I did not go there. But later, when a biography by Irene Gamble was published by MIT Press, I bought it. And that biography is wonderful. I recommend it. I became interested in her, in the artworks as well, and discovered the Duchamp story, which is, by the way, still very active. and I am in league with scholars, who are trying to get the urinal reattributed to the Baroness. It's a very messy, complicated business full of tremendous emotions, and I'm actually finding it quite amusing. But I do think the evidence is very strong that she's the author of the urinal, and some of it is presented, but there's actually more evidence than what is in the novel itself.
I do want to hear what you're saying about, following this evidence. So go ahead.
Yeah, so the detective theme that does relate to the Duchamp Baroness story as well, but then is present in the comic detective genre novel she's trying to write about, kind of based on her hometown, but it's funny. Well, of course, she can never write this book, but I think it has to do with reading the signs. I mean, all of life is trying to make sense of what's out there. And the Sherlock Holmes figure is, of course, the figure of Western reason, of a brain on legs, a cerebrum on legs, I believe, is taken from the book. And I am not a person who is against logic, and certainly not reason, but the elevation of reason, above the body, or separating the rational from the emotional, has been a huge problem in Western culture. It goes way back to the Greeks. And this separation, of course, has also redounded on women, because women are supposedly more bodily than men. So the Enlightenment tradition of elevating reason and denigrating feeling has feminist meaning, I think. So the book is playing with that too. And I have a character who's a witch, a kind of philosopher witch, who brings up a number of these subjects. She's a bit batty, but there's also seriousness to her arguments.
There certainly is. I mean, Patty, and even Lucy, in her way of I'm sad, is reaching into that deep unconscious. And I know that you have a particular passion for Freud, as you mentioned earlier, about how he talked about memory. And one of the things that I really loved in the book was this sense of the uncanny, Do you want to talk about that? You want me to just say what I found on
Yeah, you say what you see. Yeah.
Okay, so this thing about what is familiar and yet unfamiliar, in by repression in some cases, in this case by the lost journal. So there's the encounter of the past and present, but also this presence of ghosts throughout the book that are there as spectral, hovering spirits or presences. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of this is obviously generated unconsciously in the writer too, but I am interested in the unheimlich, right, which is translated as uncanny, but in German, it's literally the unhome, right? So unheimlich. And Freud talks about, as you said, familiar that's unfamiliar. And this goes back into familial material. And I think that family, the story of the father particularly in this book, is that uncanny or unhome, the home that's at the same time that undoes itself. And that's where I think the resistance to the paternalism that she encounters all the time originates. But it's very difficult to face that because it's facing an intimate, beloved person. That's hard, right? It's easier with the stranger.
It is. And in your book, the stranger is sort of an overlay on this very old struggle.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is how it works for human beings, right? That, I like to use the example, say a man who is continually getting into conflicts with his boss. He gets into a fight with the cop who gives him a ticket, et cetera, right? After these incidents build up, you start to say to yourself, well, this man has problems with authority, and you look back and maybe he had a big problem with his own father. Maybe the father had trouble with him, so that unwinding these stories often means unwinding a deeper, earlier story. So I wanted to have that in the book.
Well, you certainly do. And now that it's out in paperback, I hope people will get the book and see this unwinding of memory, and then how also the spool moves forward into the present and then into the future. Thanks, Siri, for joining me today.
You were just great. Thanks for reading the book so carefully. It means a great deal to me.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself, Mamta.
You too.